What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one break down what's going on with NIO stock, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to break down some very important technical analysis aspects of NIO and talk about what's going on with Tesla, SPY, and the QQQ, what the news is saying about NIO, and why on earth I do believe NIO has some potential to see some interesting volatility based off what I'm seeing in the markets. Now, before I break things down about all this information, before I talk about how it may affect NIO, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. NIO was up 0.19% for the day, but it did drop all the way down to our 200 EMA before getting a bounce. Once again, NIO is on a downtrend right now, and we're starting to see NIO make lower highs. And as this is going on, I just want to mention that I think the market's going to have a big effect on NIO as well. Now, something very interesting is going on in the markets. Let me first talk about this data first before I break that down. For tomorrow, I just want to remind everyone we have some big bank earnings coming out. We have Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Morgan Stanley, and etc. And then for Wednesday, we have Goldman Sachs. We also have Tesla, Netflix, and IBM, which are going to be very, very important. So we're going to be watching these all very, very carefully. Make sure you're ready for this, especially for tomorrow. The big banks are going to affect how the market opens. Now, to add on to this, for tomorrow, we also have some Fed speakers. We have some industrial production data dropping, but Fed speakers are going to be coming out at 10 o'clock a.m. New York time or Eastern time if you're on the East Coast. For me, it's 7 o'clock a.m. since I'm on the West Coast. I just wanted to make that very clear. Be prepared for Barr and Gibson from the Fed giving their speeches. Now, as far as NIO goes, there was a headline that came out that said that the top owners of NIO are retail investors with a 50% stake, while 33% is held by institutions. Now, the reason why this is important is because when stocks are heavily owned by retail, in my opinion, they are more prone to manipulation. It's more likely for them to be manipulated. There's going to be a lot more volatility. That's part of why NIO dropped even harder than many of its predecessors and counterparts. Now, in my opinion, despite this, I still think there's a lot of upside potential in NIO because of the fundamental improvements that are still being made on a daily basis. I also think that NIO has a lot of potential over the next few weeks. Once we get past the next 2 weeks of trading for the next deliveries report. So that's going to be very important for them. And I'm still very excited for what NIO is about to bring us with the new ES6. We also have the ET5, the sedan. That's once again very awesome for them. It also ended up getting an Euro NCAP 5-star safety rating after the ET7 got it and their other SUV. This is once again even more bullish news for the longer term future of this company. I'm very excited about this company as well. Now, for the price per ratio, this thing is starting to decline a little bit as NIO is slowing down a bit. And to add on to this, Morgan Stanley is still saying they expect NIO to outperform the markets. Tuesdays tend to be better days. Historically, we're green about 55% of the time. And we tend to be red more often on Mondays, but we ended up being green today. So it's a bit of an exception. July tends to be a strong month for NIO, and so far it has been a pretty good month. August tends to be weaker and September tends to be stronger, but this could be very different for the rest of the year because you have to remember that for most of this year, NIO was selling off. It was crashing for the majority of this year. That's because of manipulation, also because of some weak numbers we got from NIO. But don't forget that as the numbers improve, NIO should be trying to offset the downside with more upside for the second half of this year if they truly meet expectations. There's a good chance it's going to improve big time, so make sure you watch it carefully. To add on to this, I just want to mention that the volume is only 28 million, so it has very weak volume. So we're going to be watching how NIO reacts to all of this for tomorrow. But let me first talk about SPY. I want to mention something important. This also correlates with SPX or ES or whatever you want to trade. They're not exactly the same, but they do have some similarities or many, many similarities. When you look at SPY, okay, I'm eyeing a potential head and shoulders that's developing. There could be a left shoulder here, a head that's starting to form, then our right shoulder should be forming soon before we start to see downside. And that's what I'm leaning towards. You could argue that there's a left shoulder already done, and the head is on the verge of forming right now. Could the head be done with? It's a possibility that the high is already in, and the market's going to start cooling off and retracing to the 449 level by tomorrow. Then it gets one more bounce, maybe going into Wednesday as we have some big earnings and there's some more hype. Then the final top should be in if we fail to break 54.52 as the high. So we might see lots of sideways price action for the next couple of days before we start to see downside. And I'm leaning more in the direction of that happening because we could be forming a giant distribution phase. Part of why I'm saying this is because we have a negative divergence on the 4 hour, on the 1 hour, and many of these different time frames on SPY that keeps on developing. The 4 hour is also showing this. You can see we're making a higher high, and yet the RSI is just not following it. And same thing on the smaller time frames. I mean, if you look at the 3 minute time frame, we actually formed this divergence throughout the day as the chart was pumping, but the RSI was not following it. The RSI was at 78 in the morning, and it ended up going to a high of about 78.5, but it was a little bit higher by the time we started off, 78.63. So technically, there was a divergence which led to the sell off, and it could just continue going into tomorrow. So that's what I'm leaning towards, basically like a left shoulder on the 1 hour formed on Friday. The head just formed today potentially, or it could be starting to form tomorrow. So maybe a little more upside than downside, or it just starts to downside now. So left shoulder ahead to be formed, and then the right shoulder is going to form before more downside. That's what I'm leaning towards on SPY. For Tesla, it looks bullish. It's holding up quite nicely. We might see Tesla get a retest of 292 by the morning, maybe as high as 295. Slow down a bit, then just try to continue going. It's gaining some strength. It held up quite decently. It did slow down a bit because of some news involving the SEC, politicians, and etc. But for now, it's holding up, so it looks quite nice. And then for the triple Q, we have a potential left shoulder, the head forming. I don't know if the head is done with. It could be done, may not be. And maybe a right shoulder could be forming. I'm leaning in this direction because I am anticipating downside, looking at the negative divergence that's forming. That's what my gut's telling me. I'm not saying it's going to be a crash, just a very healthy pullback. And I have a feeling we have this left shoulder, the head, and all of this is going to be forming very soon. So with that said, okay, with that in mind, that tells me that we might see some downside for NIO as soon as tomorrow. We might see NIO come down to 10.27 or a little bit lower than that and kind of stay within this range for some time. Then we could get one more bounce when the right shoulder forms before NIO starts to see more downside with the markets. And it eventually, it's going to make its way, in my opinion, down to like the very high nines, like 9.9, very close to 9.92 is where we have this like imbalance. There's also another one down here on this like 9.49 level. So I'm going to be watching these imbalances to get filled. I'm going to be watching for a potential pullback, a bounce, and then another pullback to come, and then these imbalances to get filled all the way back into the nines. That's the direction I'm leaning in. So I'm a little bit more bearish on you, at least for the short term. But for the medium term, the biggest catalyst, and I know there's going to be some data coming out for registrations for this week. They tend to not be that significant for NIO. The biggest thing for NIO for the next 2 weeks is going to be the deliveries report. If they give us something very strong, something that investors could chew on, NIO is going to explode. It's going to break above $11 in August if we get a good deliveries report. That is going to determine how the stock does. Until then, we might see some downwards pressure later on this week, maybe a drop tomorrow all the way down to the 10.2s, then a bounce when the market forms the right shoulder, then a bigger drop later for NIO down to the 9s, 9.9, maybe even as low as 9.5, followed by just sideways price action as we approach the deliveries. Maybe a bounce as well, off like 9.9 to 9.5, somewhere around there it bounces. And then we're going to make a very big move at the very end of July, going into August, depending on how NIO's deliveries look right about here. So we're actually not that far. We're about 2 weeks away. That's going to be huge for NIO. If they do very well with deliveries, NIO is going to explode. It's going to break past 11. We're going to see the 12s, 13s, 14s for NIO. If they do bad, it's going to get rug pulled all the way back down to the 8s. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm leaning more bullish on it, though. I think they're going to do very well. That's what I see for NIO for the time being. So I'm anticipating some downside for the short term. Uh, Maybe a small bounce with the right shoulder forming on SPY and etc. a little bit later. And then more downside after the market starts selling off more. And then after that, we're going to see what happens. All right, so that's what I'm seeing for NIO, basically. I'm going to be watching 10.27 for tomorrow. I'm leaning more in the direction of that potentially being tested. Could drop a little bit lower depending on the news. If you want to be bullish, we need to break above the 50 EMA on the 1 hour time frame at 10.6. If it does so, that can be very nice. But for now, we're just going to be watching this. All right, guys. So thank you all so much for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. I wanted to make this as clear as possible. Thank you so much. NIO to the minutes long term is very bright. And peace out.